I was standing in my son's doorway, soaking wet from the rain, holding a baby blanket I'd spent 3 days knitting with my arthritic hands. My fingers were still bandaged from where the needles had rubbed them raw. The soft blue and white pattern had taken me so many hours of careful stitches, each one a small prayer for my new grandson that I hadn't even met yet. I was so excited to finally hold little Tommy after 2 months of excuses from Jake and Amanda. Not a good time, Mom. The baby's sleeping. Maybe next week. But today they'd finally said yes. I could come see my grandson. The front door was unlocked, just like when Jake was little, and would leave it open for me. I stepped inside their beautiful marble entryway, rainwater dripping from my coat onto their expensive floor. I was about to call out when I heard my daughter-in-law's voice floating from the kitchen. God, I hope Grandma doesn't come today. She always brings those ugly homemade gifts. So pathetic. My heart stopped. I stood there frozen, clutching the blanket that had cost me 3 sleepless nights of pain. Then I heard my son laugh. Actually laugh. The knitting thing is so embarrassing. My friends see her stuff and think we're poor or something. When she does come, Amanda continued, we need to hide her gifts before people see them. Last time, that scarf looked like a kindergartner made it. At least she won't be around much longer, Jake said, and I heard the cruel smile in his voice. Then we won't have to pretend to like her crafts anymore. I stood there in their doorway, rainwater pooling at my feet, holding 3 days of love and agony in my hands, while they dismissed me as just a sad old woman with nothing to offer but embarrassing crafts. They thought I was pathetic. They thought my love was worthless. They had no idea how much their cruelty was about to cost them. They had no idea I'd heard every single word, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming next. They were about to learn that underestimating your mother can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. Before we continue, subscribe for more stories that speak to every woman who's ever been undervalued, overlooked, or underestimated, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let me back up and tell you how I got to that devastating moment in their doorway. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 72 years old, and I've been a widow for 4 years now. My husband Robert and I were married for 45 beautiful years before cancer took him away. He was my everything, and when he died, I felt like half of myself disappeared too. I live alone now in a small apartment across town. It's nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom place with good light for my knitting, and a little balcony where I grow herbs. After Robert passed, I realized I didn't need the big house anymore. Jake had moved 6 hours away to the state capital 5 years ago for his job, and those phone calls that used to be weekly became monthly, then even less frequent. I spent 30 years as a loan officer at the local bank before I retired. I was good with numbers, good with people, good at helping families figure out their finances. Robert always said I had a gift for seeing the big picture when it came to money. But these days, most people just see me as an old lady who knits. And yes, I do knit. A lot. It's how I show love. How I stay connected to the people I care about. Even with my arthritis getting worse every year. Even when my fingers swell up and the needles feel like they're cutting into my skin, I keep knitting. I make scarves for the homeless shelter, blankets for the animal rescue, and special pieces for my family. Well, my family of one. Just Jake. Since Amanda came into the picture 3 years ago, things changed. The calls got shorter. The visits stopped altogether. They got married last year, and I had to fight just to get invited to the wedding. When Amanda got pregnant, I was over the moon. Finally, a grandchild. Finally, a reason for Jake to need me again. But the excuses started immediately. The pregnancy is high risk. Amanda needs rest. Maybe after the baby comes. 2 months after Tommy was born, I was still waiting for an invitation to meet my grandson. People think I'm just a lonely old widow, living on Social Security. I drive a 10-year-old car, shop with coupons, wear the same sweaters I've had for years. I volunteer at the library's children's reading program twice a week, and I spend my evenings knitting while watching old movies. What people don't see is that Robert was very, very good at planning for our future. His life insurance policy was substantial. I've been investing carefully for decades, That modest lifestyle I live. It's by choice, not necessity. Robert and I learned the value of living below our means, and I've continued that tradition. But Jake and Amanda don't know the full picture of my finances. They think I have some money from Robert's insurance, but they have no idea how much. When they do call, it's usually for advice about mortgages or investments. They see me as someone with a little financial wisdom, but not someone with real money. That morning, 3 days before their cruel conversation, I'd gotten the call I'd been waiting for. "Mom," Jake said, "Amanda thinks it might be okay for you to visit this weekend. Just for a few hours." A few hours. To meet my 2-month-old grandson. After waiting so long. I was so grateful, so excited, that I immediately started planning what I could bring. And of course, I thought of knitting. What could be more perfect than a handmade blanket for baby Tommy, something made with love by his grandmother's own hands? The arthritis in my fingers had been particularly bad that week. My knuckles were swollen, my joints aching, but I didn't care. I was going to make the most beautiful baby blanket Tommy would ever have. For 3 days, I worked on that blanket, soft blue and white yarn in an intricate pattern I'd learned from my own mother. Every stitch was a prayer. Every row was a blessing for my grandson. When the needles rubbed my skin raw, I put on bandages and kept going. When my fingers cramped, I soaked them in warm water and continued. It was going to be perfect. It was going to show them how much I loved that baby, how much I wanted to be part of his life. I had no idea I was about to learn exactly what they really thought of me, my love, and everything I had to offer. And they had no idea they were about to discover what happens when you break a grandmother's heart. That Friday morning when Jake called and said I could finally visit, I was so excited I could barely contain myself. "Amanda thinks it might be okay for you to come this weekend," he said. "Just for a few hours. Just for a few hours. To meet my 2-month-old grandson." But I didn't care. I would take any time they'd give me. I spent the entire Friday finishing Tommy's blanket. My fingers were screaming in pain, but I pushed through every stitch. When I was done, it was beautiful, soft blue and white, in an intricate cable pattern that had taken me 3 solid days to complete. I wrapped it carefully in tissue paper and placed it in a gift bag with a card that said, "For my precious grandson, with all my love, Grandma Maggie." Saturday morning, I was up at 5 a.m. getting ready. I wanted to look nice for them, for the baby. I put on my best blouse, the blue one that Robert always said brought out my eyes. I packed some homemade cookies for Jake and Amanda, along with the blanket. The drive to their house normally takes 6 hours, but with the storm that rolled in, it took nearly 7. Rain was coming down in sheets, and my old windshield wipers could barely keep up. But I didn't care. I was finally going to meet Tommy. I was finally going to hold my grandson. Their neighborhood was everything I expected. Beautiful houses, perfectly manicured lawns, expensive cars in every driveway. Jake had done well for himself, and I was proud. When I pulled into their circular driveway, I sat in my car for a moment just looking at their house. It was gorgeous, all modern lines and huge windows. I grabbed the gift bag with Tommy's blanket and hurried through the rain to their front door. I was soaking wet by the time I reached the porch. But I was smiling. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The front door was unlocked, which surprised me but also felt familiar. Jake used to leave the door unlocked for me when he was little, knowing I'd let myself in. Maybe some things hadn't changed after all. I pushed the door open quietly, not wanting to wake the baby if he was sleeping. I could hear voices coming from the kitchen, and I was about to call out when I heard Amanda's voice, clear as day. "God, I hope Grandma doesn't come today. She always brings those ugly homemade gifts. So pathetic." I froze. My hand was still on the door handle, rainwater dripping from my coat onto their beautiful marble floor. Had I heard that right? Then I heard my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, laugh, actually laugh. "The knitting thing is so embarrassing, Amanda. My friends see her stuff and think we're poor or something." My heart was hammering in my chest. I should have left right then. I should have turned around and walked back to my car. But I couldn't move. I stood there like a statue, clutching Tommy's blanket, listening to them destroy me. When she does come, Amanda continued, and I could hear the eye roll in her voice. We need to hide her gifts before people see them. Last time, that scarf she made looked like a kindergartner made it. I was mortified when my mother saw it. I know, Jake agreed, and she takes forever to explain every little detail about how she made it. Like anyone cares about knitting patterns. It's just sad, really. The words hit me like physical blows. Every gift I'd ever made for them. Every hour I'd spent creating something with love. They thought it was embarrassing. They thought I was pathetic. But Amanda wasn't done. At least she won't be around much longer, she said casually, like she was talking about the weather. Then we won't have to pretend to like her crafts anymore. Jake laughed again. Yeah, and we won't have to feel guilty about not visiting. I mean, what's the point? She just sits there knitting and talking about Dad like he's still alive. It's depressing. The baby crying interrupts her stories anyway, Amanda added. She's just going to try to take over and tell us what we're doing wrong. Old people always think they know better. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just about my knitting. This was about me. They didn't want me in their lives. They didn't want me around their son. They were waiting for me to die so they wouldn't have to pretend anymore. Standing there in their entryway, soaking wet and holding a blanket I'd poured my heart into, I realized something devastating. Every conversation we'd had for the past year had been them managing me. Every excuse about why I couldn't visit had been them protecting themselves from me. Every short phone call had been them doing their duty as minimally as possible. I looked down at the beautiful blanket in my hands. 3 days of work. 3 days of pain. 3 days of love and hope and excitement for my grandson. And they thought it was garbage. Slowly, quietly, I walked into their living room and placed the gift bag with Tommy's blanket on their expensive white couch. I didn't open it. I didn't leave the card. I just set it down like the unwanted burden they clearly thought it was. Then I turned around and walked back to the door. My hands were shaking as I gripped the handle. Behind me, I could still hear them talking and laughing, completely unaware that their words had just shattered their mother and grandmother into a million pieces. I walked back to my car in the pouring rain, got behind the wheel and sat there for a moment. 24 years I'd been Jake's mother. 72 years I'd been on this earth, and in 5 minutes of overheard conversation, I'd learned exactly how little I meant to the people I loved most. But as I drove home through that storm, something else started growing inside me alongside the heartbreak. Something that felt like clarity. Something that felt like resolve. They thought I was just a pathetic old woman with nothing to offer but embarrassing knits. They thought I'd be gone soon and they could stop pretending. They had no idea how wrong they were about everything. The drive home was the longest 6 hours of my life. I cried so hard I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see through my tears. Every mile I drove, their words echoed in my head. Pathetic. Embarrassing. At least she won't be around much longer. By the time I got home to my little apartment, it was almost midnight. I sat in my car in the parking lot, looking up at my dark windows and realized something terrible. This wasn't the first time they'd talked about me this way. This was just the first time I'd heard it. I started thinking back over the past year, looking for clues I'd missed. How many times had Jake cut our phone calls short? How many times had Amanda suddenly remembered an appointment when I suggested visiting? How many times had they exchanged glances when I showed them something I'd made? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every interaction, every conversation, every gift I'd given them. The scarf, Amanda said, looked like a kindergartner made it. I'd spent 2 weeks on that scarf, learning a new pattern specifically because I thought she'd love the color. The sweater I'd knitted Jake for his birthday. He'd thanked me, but I realized now I'd never seen him wear it. Not once. Around 3 in the morning my phone rang. Jake. Mom. Are you okay? We found your gift bag on the couch, but you weren't here. What happened? I stared at the phone, listening to the panic in his voice. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to scream at him. But a bigger part of me was just tired. I came by like we planned, I said quietly, but I realized it wasn't a good time after all. But Mom, the blanket, It's beautiful. Amanda and I were just saying how amazing it is. You must have spent so much time on it. Lies. Such smooth, easy lies. Decades being his mother. And he was lying to me like I was a stranger. I heard you, I said simply. There was silence on the other end. Long, telling silence. Mom, I don't know what you think you heard. But I heard everything, Jake. Every word. More silence. Then Amanda's voice in the background, hissing something I couldn't quite make out. Mom, Jake said, and his voice had changed. Less panic, more damage control. Look, Amanda's been really stressed with the baby. You know how new mothers can be. She didn't mean anything by it. And you? Did you not mean anything by it when you laughed? When you called my gifts embarrassing? Mom, you're taking this out of context. We love your gifts. We love you. Come back tomorrow and we'll talk about this properly. But I could hear Amanda in the background. And this time, I caught what she was saying. Just tell her whatever she wants to hear. We need to manage this. Manage this. Manage me. I need some time to think, I told Jake, and hung up. He called back immediately. I didn't answer. He called 5 more times that night. I let them all go to voicemail. The next morning, Amanda called. Her voice was sickeningly sweet. Maggie, I am so sorry about yesterday. I was having such a hard day with the baby. And I said some things I didn't mean. You know how hormones can be after giving birth. That blanket is absolutely gorgeous. And Tommy looks so precious in it. More lies. Each word was carefully chosen. Calculated to smooth things over. I would love for you to come back this weekend, she continued. We can take some beautiful photos of you with Tommy. Make this right. Something in her tone made me suspicious. This was too polished, too perfect. This wasn't a genuine apology. This was manipulation. That sounds lovely, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Let me check my schedule and get back to you. Oh, wonderful. We really want to make this up to you. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, staring at my bandaged fingers. Those bandages were from making their baby a blanket they thought was ugly. Those cuts were from creating something they planned to hide from their friends. That afternoon, my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on my door. She looked concerned. Maggie dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right with Jake? He called here yesterday looking for you. Said something about making sure you were okay, but also asked some strange questions. Strange questions. Well, he wanted to know if I'd noticed any signs that you might be having memory problems, getting confused. He seemed very concerned about your mental state. My blood went cold. Jake had called my neighbor asking about dementia signs. While I was driving home crying over their cruelty, he was already working on a backup plan. If I told people what I'd heard, he could claim I was confused, misremembering things. Did he ask anything else? I managed to ask. He mentioned something about wanting to help you with financial decisions, since older people can sometimes make mistakes with money. I told him you seemed sharp as a tack to me. But he seemed really worried. Financial decisions. My money. That's when it hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about them thinking I was embarrassing. This wasn't just about them tolerating me until I died. They were actively planning for my death, thinking about my money, and setting up a narrative that I might not be mentally competent. I thanked Mrs. Rodriguez, and closed the door with shaking hands. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I called my financial advisor and my lawyer and made appointments for the following week. It was time to find out exactly what Jake and Amanda thought they knew about my finances. And it was time to show them that this pathetic old woman was a lot smarter than they gave me credit for. But first, I had one more test for them. I called Amanda back. I've been thinking about what you said. I told her in my sweetest grandmother voice. I'd love to come visit again next weekend. Would that work? Oh yes. That would be perfect. We really want to make this right, Maggie. We want you to feel like part of the family. Wonderful, I said. I'll see you then. But I wasn't done investigating. Over the next few days I started paying attention to things I'd overlooked before. I called my friend Helen from the knitting circle and asked if she remembered meeting Jake and Amanda at the church potluck last year. Oh yes, Helen said. Such a lovely young couple. Though I did think it was odd when Amanda asked me how much money widows typically have from life insurance. She said she was worried about you managing finances alone. Another piece of the puzzle. Amanda had been fishing for information about my financial situation with my friends. Then I remembered something else. Last Christmas, when I'd given them each a check for $500, Amanda had made a comment that seemed innocent at the time. "You're so generous, Maggie. Jake says you've been really smart with money since Robert passed. It must be nice to have that security." I thought she was just being kind. Now I realized she was gathering intelligence. The more I thought about it, the more patterns I saw. Jake's recent calls hadn't been just to check on me. They'd been full of questions. "How's your health, Mom? Any doctor appointments coming up? Are you keeping track of your medications okay? Do you need help with any paperwork?" I'd thought he was being a caring son. But combined with his questions to Mrs. Rodriguez about my mental state, I was starting to see a different picture entirely. Wednesday morning, I got another call. This time it was Amanda. And she sounded different. Less sweet, more urgent. "Maggie, I was wondering if you could help us with something. Jake and I are looking at houses. And we wanted to know if you might consider being a reference for our mortgage application. You know, since you have experience with banking." My heart started pounding. What kind of reference? Oh, just someone who could vouch for our character. Maybe mention that Jake might have some future financial support. You know, eventually. Nothing definite. Just possibilities. There it was. They wanted to use my expected inheritance as leverage for a bigger loan. They were so confident I'd leave them money that they were willing to bet their mortgage on it. "Of course, dear," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just have them call me when they're ready." "Actually," Amanda said quickly, "could you maybe call them? The loan officer's name is Carlos Valdez, at First National. If you could just mention that Jake is your sole heir and that there might be some assets coming his way eventually, it would really help us get the house we want." Sole heir. Assets coming his way. They had my funeral already planned. "I'll call them this week," I promised. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen shaking. Not from sadness this time. From rage. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively using my future death to improve their current lifestyle. That afternoon, I drove to the library where I volunteer. I needed to think, and being around the children's books always calmed me. While I was reshelving picture books, I ran into Janet, the head librarian. "Maggie. Perfect timing. I wanted to thank you again for that generous donation last month. $5,000 will buy so many new books for the kids." $5,000. I'd written that check without thinking twice, wanting to support the reading program. But suddenly I realized something important. Jake and Amanda had no idea I'd made that donation. They had no idea I regularly gave money to charity. They thought I was hoarding every penny for their inheritance. "Janet," I said carefully, "has anyone ever called asking about my volunteer work here? Or about donations I might have made?" She looked puzzled. "Not that I know of. Why would they?" "Just curious," I said. But inside, I was thinking. They were investigating my life, my finances, my mental state. But they didn't even know about my volunteer work. They didn't know about my charitable giving. They didn't know me at all. That evening, I called Carlos Valdez at First National. I'd worked with him years ago when I was still at the bank. "Maggie, what a surprise. How can I help you?" "Carlos, I believe my son Jake and his wife Amanda are applying for a mortgage with you. They asked me to call as a reference." "Oh yes, the young couple. They mentioned you might call. They said you'd be able to confirm some expected inheritance that could factor into their debt-to-income ratio." "I see. And how much are they trying to borrow?" "Well, I probably shouldn't share specific numbers. But let's just say they're looking at a very expensive property. They seem confident about their long-term financial prospects." After I hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the framed photo of Robert on my mantel. "They're counting our money before I'm even gone," I whispered to his picture. "They think they have it all figured out." But the worst was yet to come. Friday morning, Amanda called again. This time she wasn't pretending to be sweet. "Maggie, we need to talk about this weekend. I think it would be better if you didn't come after all." "Oh? Why is that?" "Well, Jake and I have been discussing things, and we think you might have misunderstood what you heard last Saturday. Sometimes when people get older, they can misinterpret conversations. We don't want you to get upset again over nothing." I gripped the phone tighter. "I see. We love you, of course. But we think it might be better to wait until you're feeling more stable before you visit Tommy again. We wouldn't want you to say something that might confuse him when he gets older." They were cutting me off from my grandson, using my mental state as an excuse to keep me away. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. We'll call you in a few weeks when things settle down." But before she could hang up, I heard Jake's voice in the background, clear as day. "Is she buying it?" And Amanda's response, thinking she'd covered the phone. "Yeah, she's backing down. We just have to manage this situation until she dies and leaves us her money. Then we won't have to deal with any of this drama." I hung up, and for the first time since that horrible Saturday, I smiled. Because I had a feeling that next weekend was going to be very educational. For all of us. But first, I had some phone calls to make. Starting with my lawyer. That Monday morning I sat in my lawyer's office with a stack of financial documents spread across his desk. William Patterson had been Robert's and my attorney for over 20 years, and he knew every detail of our financial planning. "Maggie," he said, looking concerned. "You mentioned on the phone that you have some concerns about your estate planning. What's changed?" I told him everything. The overheard conversation, the fake apologies, the questions about my mental state, the mortgage reference request. With each detail, his expression grew more serious. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said when I finished. "Jake and Amanda are using your expected inheritance as collateral for a mortgage, while simultaneously questioning your mental competency." "That's exactly right. And I want to know exactly what they think they're getting when I die." William pulled out a thick folder labeled with my name. "Let's review your current estate value, shall we?" As he spread out the documents, I felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Robert and I had been so careful with our money, so planned. We'd wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of, and that there would be something left for Jake too. "Your current liquid assets total about $230,000, William began. "That includes your savings, checking, and the remainder of Robert's life insurance payout." I nodded. That much I knew. "Your investment portfolio, which we've been managing conservatively, is now worth approximately $185,000. Better than I'd thought. And then there's your condo, which is completely paid off. Current market value is about $115,000. I did the math quickly. So total estate value is around $530,000. Exactly. Now Jake is listed as your primary beneficiary for most of these assets, with a few small charitable bequests we set up years ago. $530,000. More than $500,000. I sat back in my chair, processing this number. Jake and Amanda were planning their entire financial future around this money. The expensive house they wanted, the lifestyle they were building, all of it was based on my death providing them with over $500,000. "William," I said slowly, "I need to know something. Has Jake contacted you recently?" His expression darkened. "Actually, yes. About 3 weeks ago, he called asking about timeline estimates for elderly estate settlements. He said he was worried about your health and wanted to understand the process." 3 weeks ago. Right around the time Amanda got pregnant and they started making excuses about why I couldn't visit. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that was inappropriate to discuss without you present, and that you seemed perfectly healthy to me. But Maggie, I have to ask, did you give him permission to call me about this?" "Absolutely not." William made a note in his file. "There's something else." He also asked about the possibility of expediting estate proceedings, if there were concerns about an elderly person's decision-making capacity. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. He was asking about having me declared incompetent. It certainly sounded that way. I told him such proceedings require medical documentation and court approval, and that I'd seen no evidence of any cognitive decline in you. But Maggie, this concerns me greatly. While we were talking, William's assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Patterson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Carlos Valdez from First National is online too. He says it's about a mortgage reference for Jake Patterson. William and I looked at each other. Put him through, William said. Carlos, this is William Patterson. I'm here with my client, Maggie. I understand you have some questions about a mortgage application. Carlos's voice came through the speaker. Yes, thanks for taking my call. Jake and Amanda Patterson listed Maggie as a financial reference, specifically regarding future inheritance assets. They're applying for a $700,000 mortgage, and they've indicated that substantial inheritance income will factor into their ability to service this debt. $700,000. They were borrowing $700,000 against my death. Carlos, I said, what exactly did they tell you about this inheritance? Well, they estimated the estate value at around $800,000 to $1 million, available within the next few years. They seemed very confident about the timeline and amount. William and I exchanged glances. They'd inflated my estate value and were betting I'd die soon enough to save them from defaulting on their massive loan. Carlos, William interjected, I need to inform you that no such inheritance timeline has been established, and the estate value they've quoted is significantly inflated. There was silence on the other end. I see. Well, that changes things considerably. After we hung up, I sat in William's office feeling sick, not just from their greed, but from their certainty that I'd be dead soon. They weren't just waiting for my inheritance. They were counting on it, planning their lives around it, borrowing against it. There's more you should know, William said gently. I received a call last week from a private investigator asking about your assets and mental state. I refused to provide any information, but I traced the inquiry back to a law firm that specializes in elder competency cases. Jake hired a private investigator? It appears so. Maggie, I think you need to understand what's happening here. This isn't just about them being mean or ungrateful. They're building a case to have you declared incompetent, so they can control your assets while you're still alive. The room was spinning. My own son, the child I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, was actively working to have me declared mentally unfit so he could steal my money before I died. What would happen if they succeeded? I asked. If a court declared you incompetent, Jake, as your next of kin, could be appointed as your conservator. He'd have control over all your financial decisions, your living situation, your medical care. Essentially, you'd lose all autonomy. I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's comment about Jake asking about my memory problems. I thought about Amanda's questions about my mental stability. I thought about them cutting me off from Tommy, using my confusion as an excuse. They weren't just planning my funeral. They were planning my legal death while I was still breathing. William, I said, my voice stronger than I'd felt in days. I want to change my will. Completely. Are you sure? This is a big decision, and you're obviously upset. I'm not upset, I said, and I realized it was true. The heartbreak was still there, but underneath it was something much stronger. Clarity. Resolve. I'm clear-headed for the first time in months. They want my money so badly they're willing to destroy me to get it. They think I'm a pathetic old woman with no power and no options. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd lived and worked and built a life with Robert, where I'd raised Jake, where I'd volunteered and given and loved for 7 decades. They're about to learn exactly how wrong they are about me. What do you want to do? I turned back to William with a smile that probably looked a little dangerous. I want to show them what happens when you underestimate a woman who's been managing money longer than they've been alive. And your new beneficiary. I thought about the children's reading program at the library, where I spent my Tuesday mornings helping kids discover the magic of books. I thought about my knitting circle, where we made blankets for premature babies and scarves for the homeless. I thought about all the people who actually valued what I had to offer. The library's children's program gets the bulk of it. And I want to set up a special fund for my knitting circle, so they can keep making things for people who actually appreciate handmade love. William was taking notes. And for Jake? Jake gets my recipe box and a letter explaining exactly why he's getting nothing else. Maggie, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we change the will, William, I said, settling back into my chair, they've spent weeks planning my death and my legal incompetence. They've lied to banks, hired investigators, and tried to isolate me from my own grandson. The only thing I'm sorry about is that I didn't see it sooner. As William started drafting the new documents, I realized something that made me smile. Jake and Amanda thought they were so smart, so strategic. They thought they were managing a confused old woman. But they'd forgotten something important about their mother and grandmother. I'd spent 30 years as a loan officer. I knew exactly how to read people, how to spot deception, and how to protect assets from people who couldn't be trusted with them. They were about to get a very expensive education in exactly who they'd been trying to manipulate. And the lesson was going to cost them everything they'd been counting on. By Thursday, the new will was signed and filed. But I wasn't done yet. First, I called Carlos Valdez at First National. Carlos, this is Maggie. I need to inform you officially that I have no intention of leaving any inheritance to Jake. I've changed my will, and he is no longer a beneficiary of my estate. Oh my, that definitely affects their loan application. I'll need to document this immediately. There's more. I did not give permission for them to use my name as a reference, and any claims they made about my estate value or timeline were completely unauthorized. Within hours, Jake's phone was ringing. Their dream house loan was being reconsidered. Next, I drove to the library. Janet was delighted when I told her about my new will. Maggie, this is incredibly generous. The children's program will be able to expand beyond our wildest dreams. There's just one thing, I said. When the time comes, I'd like you to make sure Jake knows exactly where the money went. I want him to understand that his mother's pathetic knitting hobby funded something that actually matters. That weekend, my phone rang. Jake? Frantic. Mom. The bank called. They're saying you told them you weren't leaving me any money. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Jake. But Mom, you can't just, we've already put an offer on a house. We told them about the inheritance. You told them about money that was never promised to you. This is insane. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe we should have you talk to someone, get some help. Like a competency evaluation? I asked sweetly. Funny you should mention that. My lawyer told me someone's been asking about those. Silence. Mom, I don't know what you think you know. I know about the private investigator. I know about your calls to my attorney. I know you've been planning to have me declared incompetent so you can control my money. More silence. Then Amanda's voice in the background. How does she know about that? You want to know the really sad part? I continued. If you just loved me, just accepted my gifts with grace, just let me be part of Tommy's life, you would have inherited everything. But you got greedy. You got cruel. And now you get nothing. Mom, wait. We can fix this. We love you. We love your gifts. That blanket I made for Tommy? I spent 3 days on it while you were planning my legal death. The recipe box I'm leaving you was my mother's. It's all you get, and it's more than you deserve. I hung up. Over the next week, the consequences rippled through their lives. Without the inheritance as collateral, their loan was denied. They had to withdraw their offer on the expensive house. Amanda's parents, who'd co-signed part of the application, learned about the fake inheritance claims and were furious. At the library, I started teaching a knitting class for kids. Every Tuesday, children would come learn basic stitches while I read them stories. It was everything I'd hoped sharing my love of knitting with Tommy would be. My knitting circle friends were thrilled about the fund I'd established. Maggie, said Ruth. This means we can make blankets for every baby in the NICU. Your gift is going to wrap so many children in love. 3 weeks later, Jake showed up at my apartment. He looked terrible, exhausted, desperate. Mom, please. We need to talk. About what? About making this right. About being a family again. He was holding Tommy, and for a moment, my heart softened. My grandson was beautiful, perfect, innocent in all this mess. Can I hold him? I asked. Jake hesitated, then handed Tommy over. The baby looked up at me with Robert's eyes, and I felt that familiar ache of love and loss. He's wearing the blanket, I noticed. The blue and white blanket I'd spent 3 days knitting was wrapped around my grandson. Amanda? Amanda finally realized how beautiful it is, how much work you put into it. I looked at Jake, this man I'd raised, this person I'd loved unconditionally for 35 years. You know what the saddest part is? This blanket represents everything you threw away. Not the money, Jake. The love. I know. I messed up. We both did. But we can fix this. I kissed Tommy's forehead and handed him back. That blanket took me 3 days to make. This decision took me 72 years to understand. Some things can't be fixed, Jake. Some betrayals are too deep. So that's it? You're really going to cut off your only child? I looked at him standing in my doorway, holding the grandson I'd probably never see grow up, wearing the blanket they'd called pathetic. You cut me off first, I said quietly. You just didn't tell me until I overheard it. I closed the door and sat in my kitchen, looking at my bandaged fingers. They were healing now, just like the rest of me. That evening, I called my knitting circle friends and asked if anyone wanted to help me start a new project. I'm thinking blankets for the women's shelter, I said. Something to wrap around women who need to know they're valued. Because that's what my knitting had always been about. Love made visible, warmth you could hold, proof that someone cared enough to create something beautiful just for you. Jake and Amanda thought that was pathetic. But at the library, in the shelter, in the NICU where premature babies would be wrapped in my knitting circle's blankets, my love would matter. And when I'm gone, the children's program will continue because a woman they dismissed as embarrassing chose to invest in people who understood the value of handmade love. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's proving that your love was never worthless in the first place. It just needed to find the right people to appreciate it. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever overheard people you love talking about you in a way that completely broke your heart? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine.